Introduction to Human Resources Management, Chapter 7, Training Employees. As noted earlier, training is basically a formal process by which an employer can help their employees acquire job-related knowledge, skills, and abilities. It's typically for your current job. It's to get you better at doing the job that you've been hired to do and that you're currently in place. You can do formal classes, one-to-one mentoring, on-the-job training. You can do it remotely. You could either go to other locations or you could do it online using things like Zoom or WebEx. All training should be linked to organizational needs and motivation of employees. Having been the director of training at one organization and now currently working at another organization in the training department, I should point out that sometimes managers will come to us and say, we have an employee that's not doing their job very well, we need to get them training. We'll talk about needs assessment in a moment, but figuring out whether or not there is an actual need for training is the key. Everything is about return on investment. Training takes time to develop, it takes time to complete. And if you're not going to get the outcome that you're looking for, it can be a waste of time and therefore a waste of money and reduce efficiency and diminish the return on investment. There is no return on investment if you give someone training that they don't need. So conducting a needs assessment is very important. And sometimes, like I said, I'd have a manager that came in. I would talk to the employee and find out that they didn't do their job very well because they weren't even really sure what their job was. That goes more to the manager not being very good at their job as opposed to the employee needing training because they're not very good at theirs. So training is not a panacea, but it can provide a very good value if there is a described, identified need, and the training is designed specifically to alleviate that need or address that need and improve the performance of the employee. Training is more important than ever because of the way the modern business environment is going. Things are changing because technology is changing so fast. We referenced Moore's Law before, so every year there's always going to be something new coming down the line. People need to know how that's going to affect their job, and the best way to do that is to give them some formalized manner of training. Because change happens in the workplace, people have to learn new skills. And we mentioned teamwork before as well. Working on a team, you should get trained for that too, so that people understand the best, most efficient ways to work together on a team to get the outcomes that they're seeking. Instructional design is the term used for the development of training. You want to be able to teach the skills and behaviors that help you achieve your goals, but the HR professionals need to do a needs assessment, as we just mentioned. What is the requirement? What you typically do in a needs assessment is you look at the current state of ability, you look at the future state that you would prefer there to be, identify where the gaps are, and then develop a training to address those particular gaps. So that when people take training, they're not getting training on stuff that they already know, they're getting training on things that they can need to improve their current performance. You need to prepare for training. We'll talk about that in a bit. Plan the training program, implement it, and then evaluate the results of the program. I mentioned this before. Evaluation after a project or a program is important and often falls by the wayside. People don't spend a lot of time determining whether the effort that they made was actually worth it, and that's what evaluation can do. Evaluation is key because if you are able to identify things that are weak about a particular program, in this case a training program, then you could improve it and get better results in the future. The next slide is just a graphical illustration of what we're talking about, needs assessment, whether or not people are ready for training, planning the training program, implementing the program, and then evaluating it. Just to go through this a little bit more, ensuring the readiness for training, that can be both for the employer and for the employee. I had a situation where we were training people on a brand new computer system that was going to take probably a year or more to implement. We had to make sure that we had the capability to do the training, that we had staff that was capable of doing training, that we had the equipment that people could be trained on, and we had enough workspace to be able to do it. We actually had to rent another building that had classrooms in it because we had to train almost 2,000 people. We also had to make sure that the employees were ready for the training because the computer system that we were doing was so dramatically different from what they were used to. We had to make sure that they were capable of using it. The new system was a Windows-based program, and the other one was not. So we had to make sure people knew how to use Windows. Not everybody does, depending on how old they are and what they've been exposed to, what their job required. So we had to make sure that the people were actually ready to do the training and that we were ready to provide the training to them. When you're creating a training program, after the needs assessment, you have to figure out what the objectives of the training are, identify who the trainers are as well as the trainees, and then figure out what methods you're going to use. Is it a classroom? Is it e-learning? Are you going to have on-the-job training? Are there case studies to be involved? Do you have quizzes and tests that may be a result of this? All of that has to be addressed before the training program takes place. Then to implement the training, you have to figure out what the principles of learning are, figure out how to transfer the knowledge during the training, and then ultimately, as I already mentioned, you want to evaluate everything to make sure it was effective. Training is usually monitored or managed with a learning management system or an LMS. This is an application that helps you sign up for courses, take the courses, schedule the courses, get feedback for the courses, take whatever testing might be required as well. We had mentioned the LMS a little bit earlier, I think probably in the review of Chapter 1. The LMS, as well as the rest of the HR system that you may employ, can link the performance management system to training needs. So if you have an evaluation, if a manager says the person's doing a really good job, but they have a couple of deficits in their skill set, you may be able to find training courses through the LMS that person should be able to sign up for. And the manager can actually assign particular training that they find would be appropriate. I've already mentioned what a needs assessment is, so this slide I've kind of already talked over it a little bit. What you really do need to do is determine what is the context in which the training is going to occur. Is it across the organization? Is it within one area of the organization? Where it's going to happen? Who needs the training? Is it an entire group of people? Is it only a few people that have recognized performance deficits? And what kind of tasks are we going to do? What training is going to be covered? Is it nuts and bolts from the beginning to end? Is it just very particular subject matters that need to be targeted? All of that should be addressed in the needs assessment, and you need the needs assessment to be complete before you can develop the training. Part of the needs assessment is also to look at the organization. How appropriate is it to give training to people? Some people don't have an office. Some people don't work at the same location where the training facilities are located. You have to figure out the most appropriate way to get the training to them. The organizational analysis will also look at the organization strategy and whatever resources you have available. Do we have enough money to pay for training if we have to hire somebody? Do we have enough resources internally in terms of trainers and subject matter experts that would be able to develop and conduct the training? One thing that's also important is to give managers support for training activities. I've had employees come to tell me that they wanted to take training. They thought it would help them do better at their job, but their manager would not approve them for the time to be able to take the training because the managers had convinced themselves that these people were just trying not to work. They wanted to take training so that they didn't have to do their job for a half a day or a day. If you have good training, then that should not be an issue. But managers still want people to get the job done, and if they're not doing the work, then they have sometimes a knee-jerk reaction to not approve for training. If you want to have a true learning organization, it should be from the top down, pushing through managers to allow people to get the training that they need. You also have to take a peek at the people, figure out what their needs are through the needs assessment. Do the performance deficiencies result from a lack of KSAs, or is it something else? Do they not have enough time? Do they not have enough equipment? Is the manager not giving them good feedback or instruction? Who needs the training? Is it one individual person? Is it an entire group of people? And are they ready for training? I've already alluded to that previously. You can't teach someone how to do advanced methods if they don't have the preliminary basic skill set yet. Task analysis identifies the various tasks of a job that need to be trained. When you carry out the task analysis as part of the needs assessment, you need to look at the job's equipment and environment, because if you don't have access to the equipment, you can't train people on how to use it. There may be time constraints, there may be location constraints, there could be safety considerations if you're using equipment that could cause injury, and there are also performance standards. You want to make sure that people perform at a level that would be considered appropriate. Training is a good place to do that. In terms of readiness for training and employee characteristics, you want to make sure that they are able to learn the subject matter, that they have a favorable attitude toward training, and that they are motivated to learn. A lot of times you can address that through your recruitment and selection process, because you could ask questions about that. If you're in a job that has a lot of training, things change a lot, and it requires a lot of additional training, you should screen for people that have these characteristics. That makes it a little bit easier for them to get the training that they need going forward. We also talked about managers pushing down the ability to do training and agreeing to let people do it. That comes from a positive work environment, being this learning organization that encourages learning and tries to give people every opportunity to get better at their job. The next slide just has a list of things that managers could do to help support training. I'm not going to go through it here, but please read through it. And again, it's mentioned in your book. Training objectives should have the expectations. If you're going to do training, there is a purpose for it, and the purpose is to achieve something. That is the expectation. If you haven't done a needs assessment, you will not have defined what exactly it is that you're looking for, and you can't have any expectations. So those are key. If you don't achieve the expectations, the training was probably a waste of time. What level of performance is acceptable, and can the training get people to that level? The conditions under which the employee is going to apply what they've learned. If you have a really complex training that takes a long period of time, it may make more sense to break the training up so that people can take a portion of the training back to the job and implement it and employ it as part of their tasks. If you give them 50 things that they have to remember by the time they get back to the job, they may remember the first couple, but they may not remember the rest. So that also goes to course design. If you're looking at what types of things people need to know and how they can apply it in the workplace, you may want to break it up into more bite-sized chunks that people could apply more readily. To the extent possible, you want to come up with some type of performance standards that you can measure so that if they were on the job, you could measure how well they did, then they took the training, and then you can test them on the job again to see if they've improved. That's a really good way to get a return on investment calculation from training, but it's not always the easiest thing to do because measuring performance in certain jobs, like customer service, can be relatively difficult. If you're in sales, that's a different story. Or if you're in manufacturing, if it's the number of things that you're producing or the number of items that you're selling, that's a little bit easier to measure. You also need to know what kind of resources people have. A lot of times, as I said, people point to training to fix a problem, but the problem may be that people don't have the resources that they need. They don't have the time, they don't have the equipment. If you're conducting training, should you do it in-house using your own employees, or should you hire somebody from the outside? If there's an outside company that can provide off-the-shelf training and it's generic training like Microsoft Office, you can do that and people are already adept at it. If you have particular things that are in-house policies and procedures that people need to know, that's something that you may want to develop internally. If you don't have enough staff to do it, you may have to hire a company to do it, and that will cost you more money, but it may make more sense to do that than to keep people on staff for training if you don't do that on the regular. If you need to hire somebody from the outside that has expertise to be able to do the training for you, you can issue what's known as a request for a proposal. This is basically an advertisement to get a contract for somebody to provide this service to you. There are a lot of companies that are out there. You may get multiple bids that come in, and then you would take a look at it and figure out which place can give you the best value for your dollar. Whether it's done in-house or contracted out, it's usually managed by somebody in HR. It could be a training director within HR. It may be a separate department. I've worked in a department that had a separate training staff distinct from HR. So it just depends on the way the company is designed. This next chart shows how many companies use instruction from outside. So if they outsource training, close to almost 60% do some outsourcing. Operation and hosting of a learning management system, about 50% have an outside. I'm going to guess that that's close to the same number that actually use a learning management system, because unless you are probably a computer company that can develop your own, you're going to be buying it from someone else. If 50% are hosting or using a host from outside, it's probably because they don't have the need for a learning management system because of the size and scope of the company. Regardless of how many companies use outside instructors, a lot, still almost half, develop their own custom content. And that is because it's too difficult or too expensive to find someone on the outside that would either have the content that you're looking for or develop the very unique custom content that you're looking for. So you would have your own employees develop that training. The next slide just goes over the methods, techniques, and applications of training. Again, I'm not going to go over it in this lecture, but please read through them. The various training methods to talk about: classroom and distance learning. Classroom, just like school, you're in a room. Instructor-led training, it's in real time, otherwise known as synchronous training. You could have distance learning, which would be a virtual in-class training. So we would be in Teams or Zoom or WebEx or whatever feature your company uses in order to conduct the training that way. Sometimes the virtual training doesn't work, especially if you have hands-on training that needs to happen where you all have to be in the same room and use the same equipment. So some of it is dictated by the demands of the training itself. Computer-based training is typically limited to e-learning. And e-learning is an asynchronous, meaning that it's not in real time. You can take it whenever you want. You can do a portion of it and then pause. That gives a lot of flexibility to employees that may be under a time crunch and can't block out an entire day or half a day for training. They can do training when they have some downtime. The challenge of e-learning is making sure that all of the material that they need is located within the program that they're using, because they will not have somebody that they can ask questions to for clarification. E-learning does take a lot longer to set up, but it does have a lot of benefits as well for the reasons that I just mentioned. On-the-job training is when you are doing work while you are actually at the job that helps you get better at it. These are usually broken down into apprenticeships and internships. Talk about that in a couple of slides. You can read through the rest to get through some other ideas for the types of training that may be available. This chart on slide 18 talks about the types of instructional methods. So online or computer-based is about 35%. Virtual classroom, webcast, that would be about a third. Instructor-led classroom, about a quarter of the training does that. Blended training is kind of a new thing, or we call it hybrid training where I work. It's a combination of methods. So you could have an e-learning that would tell you the basics of a particular subject matter, and then we would have an in-class session live where you would come having already been exposed to that information so that we can dive right into the actual material. You get all of the preliminary vocabulary out of the way, and then when you go to the classroom, you can dive much deeper and save a little bit more time and be more effective and efficient because people are already aware of what was going on because they're able to take the e-learning portion of the course. So sometimes you can combine these things together to get a better result. So the next slide I probably already talked over a little bit. We talked about classroom instruction. Usually it's a trainer lecturing a group. Lecturing is not the best way to do it. Hopefully you have some interactive exercises and activities that you can do with the classroom. That's usually a way to get people more engaged and using their head to think about stuff and retain the knowledge that they're picking up. It can be relatively inexpensive, at least compared to buying things on the outside if you have staff that can develop training, and it's cheaper than developing e-learning because you have all of the technical expertise that has to go into that. Plus, you have to be a little bit more careful about how you design an e-learning because there's no live question and answer sessions. Distance learning, you could have trainees at different locations. You don't have to worry about them all coming at the same time. You don't have to worry about their scheduling quite as much. You can involve video conferencing, email, instant messaging, any type of online presence can help you with distance learning. Computer-based training, as I mentioned, is typically e-learning. You want to make sure that most of the material that you have in there is included in there so that if people have questions, it will be resolved. A lot of these may require you to have like a message board or have an instructor that they can contact if they have questions, and they can respond asynchronously, in other words, not live. An electronics performance support system is something that can give access to skills training, performance, and expert advice as needed. Many places don't use this. If you have an LMS and you have access to e-learning and you do in-person training, that can work, but this is basically an extra tool that you could have online that could help manage all of the training that you're doing. I already talked over this slide a little bit about on-the-job training. I wanted to clarify here, though, the difference between an apprenticeship and an internship. Typically, people talk about jobs being blue-collar and white-collar. The distinction between a white-collar job and a blue-collar job is that if you're blue-collar, it's because you're wearing some type of a uniform. You're doing more manual labor, more skilled trades type of thing. If you're a plumber, you may have a blue-collar because it's got your name printed on it, etc. If you're white-collar, it's because you're a lawyer or an accountant and you're wearing a tie. So white-collar jobs are typically business office jobs. Blue-collar jobs are more like doing work with your hands and working in the field. An apprenticeship is typically an on-the-job training format that would be appropriate for blue-collar, people that do things like plumbing and carpentry and pipe fitting and all of that. So internships, these would be white-collar jobs. If you're getting an accounting degree, you may go work for an accounting firm and they would teach you what was going on while you're there. But an internship would be a little bit different because it's not as much hands-on. The next slide does show the distinction between the two, so take a look at that. Different types of training methods, simulations are useful. If you were a pilot, you may be doing a lot of flight simulations. I think on Canvas there is a movie, a quick video clip of Qantas Airlines and the video simulator that they use for their pilots. They can be very expensive because they do require a lot of development to make sure that the simulation captures very close to reality. In the case of that pilot training, that cost several $1 million because it was basically the whole front end of an aircraft on hydraulics. When you sit in the computer to fly your airplane virtually, you pull back on the stick, the pilot will actually feel like they're taking off because the hydraulics will lift the training platform at an angle. So they can be very expensive. You can use simulations without having all of that equipment, but you still have to put the thought into it to be able to make sure that it does actively and accurately simulate what you're trying to portray. Business games and case studies, the most basic type is quizzing people about terminology using like a Jeopardy type of game. Case studies, you would look at an actual case, not tell people what the conclusion was, have them work in groups and come up with a solution, and then tell them how it either came out and what the ideal outcome would have been. Again, these are also very useful and they do help people interact and that helps them retain the things that they're learning. But at the same time, you have to spend a lot of time and care to be able to develop case studies and business games that are accurate and they really do apply to the topics that you're conveying. Some companies use experiential training, which doesn't really have anything to do with the actual job. There's a picture here of people doing like an outward bound training and going whitewater rafting. It's a way that people can get together out of work contexts and just have a better interpersonal relationship. It also helps them figure out how to deal with challenges and solve problems without actually relying on the nature of the current job or the actual work that's being done. We've already mentioned team training before. I consider it to be very useful. So if you want people to be in teams, telling them how those teams are performing and how there's appropriate activities, the appropriate behavior, all of that would be useful for that type of training. Train team leaders so that they know how to manage the teams, coordinate all of the training with cross-training, etc. Action learning is when you get people to solve a real problem, kind of like the simulation, but you could put them in the field and have them take care of a problem as it is. If you are a firefighter, they have these places where they set these houses on fire and they let you put it out. It's not a real fire, so it's more of a training situation, but it is action learning. You're actually doing the job in real time so that you can be measured in a safe environment. Principles of learning to consider is that employees usually learn best when the training links to the current task, when you can actually apply the things that you're learning to the current job. You have to have the chance to demonstrate and practice what it is that you've learned, and you need to understand whether or not you're doing a good job. So there has to be a good amount of feedback that's coming through. The next slide talks about the different types of training activities and the ways to improve those training activities. Please look at the PowerPoint that was provided in the text and read through that. Same for the next slide. You want to be able to transfer the things that people learn during training to the actual job. So you take the KSAs and make sure that they have mastered them in the classroom, but they have to be able to do it on the job. So this can even go back to needs assessment, and you can say, what kind of task do you perform? And if you're performing that task, then the training will be relevant. How many times do you perform the task? What do you do on the task? What's different about it? What's difficult? What's challenging? Then you can design the training so that you have that connection, so that the training itself is correlated to the things that they do. Measures of training success. You're always wanting to get a return on investment. Calculating ROI for training can be difficult. The most obvious way that people do it is trainee satisfaction. After a class is conducted, you ask them, hey, did you like this class? Did you hear information that you wanted? Did the trainee learn from the trainer? Did they do a good job? That may be useful to the training department, but it doesn't necessarily answer the question, did it make you better at your job? It's asking whether you enjoyed the training. Now, you could have a great training with a charismatic trainer that has nothing to do with your job that you enjoyed, but it doesn't really answer that question. However, it is a portion or part of the training evaluation. You do want to know if the training transfers to the job, if there is performance improvement, and whether or not they've maintained the knowledge, skills, and abilities that they have. All of those things really talk about the return on investment. If you can calculate those things and show that there's a positive correlation, then the training was probably worth it. So if you have training that really focuses on facts, techniques, and procedures that they can recall afterwards, then that's useful. Again, this is a good idea to break up subject matter into smaller bite-sized pieces. If you have 5 days straight of learning this whole thing, this fire hose method, it may make sense to have a 2-hour training so that they can focus on that and master it before they go on to the next section. You want to check the trainee supervisor satisfaction with the program, whether or not after the fact, when they return to the job, did they do better on the job? Have their attitudes improved? Is their performance better? If you can get those types of improvement from an individual, group, or company performance, then that is a slam dunk in terms of return on investment. The evaluation process is important because it can help identify what's right and what's wrong. You want to emulate the things that are going right, and you want to correct the things that are going wrong. You can't do either if you don't do a good quality evaluation. Different types of training applications, orientation and onboarding. Orientation is basically what you do with new employees when they first get on the job. Here's where the bathroom is located. Here's where the lunchroom is. Here's how to log into your computer, that type of thing. You give them basic information about their job. This can be relatively generic because it could be everybody that was hired. You may have more specific orientation for people from different departments. The objective with the orientation, though, is to make sure that people are aware of the organization's rules, policies, and procedures. We talked about things like sexual harassment training, developing the culture. We mentioned that a couple of chapters ago. You can include that in orientation training so that people get the idea of what the company is like right at the get-go. You can mention the mission, you can talk about the culture, what's important to the company, and you can instill that in them right at the outset. The goals of the onboarding process: make sure that people understand the rules and compliance with the regulations. You want to make sure that their job expectation and performance is clarified so that they are clear about what's going on. One of the biggest hindrances to performance is job ambiguity. People take a job and their manager doesn't do a good job of explaining what it is that they're doing. So to the extent that training can take care of that, you want to eliminate or reduce the amount of ambiguity so people can focus on what is important. It can also, as I mentioned, help enhance the culture. You talk about the history of the company, the traditions, the norms, the values, the mission. All of that can be established very early on. So onboarding is a good place for that. You can have follow-up meetings with that too in different trainings to make sure that it's kept. You also want to be able to connect the idea of the onboarding and the interpersonal relationships. A lot of times we used to do onboarding with people from different departments because sometimes they would never see these people again. We want to let people know that, yeah, you're in the accountant department and you're in R&D and you're in HR. All of these people still are working together to achieve the mission of the organization. So having an onboarding session where all of these people get to sit down and interact with one another does help build camaraderie across the organization, and it prevents different departments from being siloed quite so much. The types of training and the applications that you can use training for can help with diversity, equity, and inclusion. There are changes that are being made at the federal government level. A lot of that is through executive orders issued by the president, but that only applies to federal employees and potentially contractors who work for the federal government. There may be state laws and other federal laws that companies still need to comply with. They also may be wanting to be in line with the executive orders that are coming out. But this is something that companies may value because you can potentially make more money by having a more diverse workforce. I mentioned before, if you're catering to a demographic of customer that has a lot of different various backgrounds, it may make sense for you to have employees of a lot of different and various backgrounds as well to be able to sell your product to them. You could relate to them better if you understand what they're like, and you can do that if you have people that can relate to your customers. So regardless of whatever government programs may be in there, companies may decide that it is advantageous to them to heighten their diversity training. You can focus on behavioral trainings, making sure that people can interact appropriately with people from different backgrounds and cultures, how to deal with communication barriers, conflicts, misunderstandings. And when we talk about, I think in Chapter 16, going on a global assignment, this type of training can also help with cultural immersion, understanding that different cultures have different mores, different values, different ways of doing things that are not necessarily wrong. They are, in fact, just different. And being aware of them can help limit the amount of conflict or confusion that could come from it. So that's the end of this chapter. The last few slides are summaries. Please take a look at that and read through the book as well.